Are you ready? Because the story I'm about to tell you is unbelievable but true. Personally, I'll be honest, I was always skeptical about Coco. I thought the whole thing was just a media hype. But the more I dug into the actual research logs, the more I realized that she didn't just change the way we perceive primate intelligence. In my opinion, she completely demolished what we thought we knew about animal emotion, grief, and suffering. And honestly, the detail that still gets me? She told jokes. But before we get into the dark recording and her final words, do me a favor. Hit subscribe if you like these raw, uncut stories, and drop a comment right now. Where are you listening from, and what time is it exactly over there? I love seeing how far these videos travel. Anyway, back to the start. It involves Coco. She wasn't born in some peaceful jungle. She was born right in the middle of a city at the San Francisco Zoo on the 4th of July 1971. Fireworks were literally exploding outside. So they named her Hanabiko, which means fireworks child in Japanese. Later, everyone just called her Coco. But her life started with a disaster. As a tiny infant, she got dangerously sick, and doctors had to separate her from her mother for medical treatment. And this is the brutal part. When they tried to give her back, her mother completely rejected her, just pushed her away. Imagine that. Alone, isolated, Coco was thrown into a cage with strange, unfamiliar gorillas who didn't want her. Her only source of comfort for months was a cheap plush toy gorilla. She would just sit in the corner of a cold, empty cage, hugging this stuffed animal for dear life. But then, 1972 happened. A young graduate student named Penny Patterson walked into the zoo. She was working on her PhD and wanted to try something that most mainstream scientists considered a total joke. She wanted to teach a gorilla American Sign Language. Back then, academics thought gorillas were just dumb, aggressive brutes running on basic survival code. Eat, sleep, fight, that was it. The early days of training were a psychological battle. Normally, when you teach sign language to an infant, you physically mold their hands into the shapes. But Coco refused to let anyone touch her fingers. She would pull back, defensive. So Penny had to adapt. She just sat there for hours, holding up objects and repeating the signs over and over, hoping something would click. And it did. The first sign Coco ever showed her was drink, just touching one finger to her lips. Within a few years, she moved from the zoo to a specialized trailer laboratory on the Stanford University grounds. She had her own room, but she basically owned the place. She used to wander into Penny's quarters, rummage through stuff, and explore. And here is where Coco proved she wasn't just a trained circus animal. She started doing things that blew the researchers' minds. She started to create her own words. If she didn't know the sign for something, her brain would invent a logical combination. She didn't know the word for ring, so she signed finger bracelet. She didn't know the word for mask, so she signed eye hat. She even looked into an empty cup once and signed drink no. She had a sense of humor too, a really dark, mischievous one. She once pulled Penny's hair, laughed, and then signed apology. Another time, she pointed to herself and signed good bird, claiming she could fly, before signing that she was just kidding. I honestly used to think this whole thing was exaggerated by the media to sell newspapers. Like maybe the handlers were just seeing what they wanted to see. But then you look at her IQ test scores. Coco tested between 70 and 90. That is just below the average human baseline, which is completely mind-blowing for a non-human primate. She could even draw at the level of a 4-year-old human child, sketching her favorite toys. By the late 1970s, they moved her to Woodside, California, and she wasn't alone anymore. They brought in a male gorilla named Michael to be her boyfriend, and later another male named Nudumu. Michael learned sign language too. They became the only two animals in history who could argue with each other using human language. And they did argue. Once, Michael got jealous and annoyed and tore the leg off of Coco's favorite doll. Coco didn't attack him physically. Instead, she looked at the researchers and signed dirty, bad toilet. She literally insulted him using human swear words. And this is actually the point where most people get the science completely wrong. When we talk about animal intelligence, we tend to group all primates together. But gorillas and chimpanzees learn in fundamentally different ways. Chimpanzees are fast, impulsive learners. They watch, they copy, they grab. Gorillas are slower, more deliberate. They internalize, they process. In cognitive science, this is called observational learning versus deferred imitation. And Coco was displaying deferred imitation at a level that even some human toddlers don't reach until the age of 3 or 4. There is also a biological reason her emotional range was so wide. Gorillas have a limbic system. This is a part of the brain that processes emotion, that is structurally almost identical to ours. Same regions, same chemical triggers. When a gorilla loses someone, the cortisol spike in their body is measurable, similar to human grief response. We didn't teach Coco to feel loss. That hardware was already there. We just finally gave her the words to tell us about it. But despite her intelligence, Coco was becoming a massive 300-pound adult Western lowland gorilla. And this is where the biology gets scary. A gorilla has a bite force of 1,300 pounds per square inch, enough to snap a human thigh bone like a twig. Their hands are built for brute force, for tearing down branches. Yet, Coco's brain map had completely rewired itself. Which brings us to her birthday in 1984. Coco was lonely, and she started obsessively signing one word: cat. Every single morning, cat. The keepers tried to trick her with a plush toy cat, but Coco was smart. She took the stuffed animal and threw it out of her enclosure. She was furious. She wanted a living soul to care for. So Penny went to the local shelter and brought her a litter of stray kittens. Coco watched them crawl around her massive feet, reached down with fingers the size of sausages, and gently picked up a tiny, gray tabby with no tail. She put him on her neck and signed, "Soft Good Cat." She named him All Ball. For months they were inseparable. She would carry him on her back, try to nurse him, and use the absolute tip of her giant nails to tickle his tiny little belly. Then January happens, 1985. All Ball managed to slip through a tiny tear in the screen mesh of the outdoor enclosure. He wandered out onto the highway outside of the facility, and a car hit him. He was dead instantly. Penny Patterson had to go into the enclosure and break the news. She sat on the floor and signed, "All Ball hit by car. No more." Coco didn't roar. She didn't rip her blankets. She just sat perfectly still, staring at the concrete floor for 20 minutes in total, in heavy silence. Then she walked to her corner, pointed to a picture of a cat, and signed, "Bad, sad, frown." She pressed her hands to her cheek, the sign for sleep, and kept signing, "Sleep cat." She was trying to process that her friend was never waking up. And this brings us back to that audio recording from later that night. Penny was walking past the dark enclosure around midnight. She had her pocket recorder running, and through the walls she heard it. It wasn't a normal gorilla grunt. It was this low, long, pathetic whimpering sound, like a human sob, but much deeper in the chest. A 300-pound wild animal, completely alone in the dark, crying because she was mourning. Now, as Coco's fame grew, after a National Geographic cover, things got weird. She developed some bizarre, very human quirks. For some reason, Coco had an obsession with the human chest. She would constantly sign to her female caregivers requesting to see their breasts. It actually got so intense that in 2005, 3 former employees filed a lawsuit against the foundation, claiming they were pressured by management to comply with the gorilla's request to avoid upsetting her. It was a bizarre, controversial moment that showed just how unpredictable her psychological world was. But her emotional depth never faded. At age 19, she passed the mirror test, immediately recognizing her own reflection instead of thinking it was another gorilla. And she loved television. Her absolute favorite movie was Tea with Mussolini, but she was incredibly sensitive to it. Whenever this scene came on where a young boy has to say goodbye to his family, Coco would literally turn her whole body away from the screen. She refused to watch it because it made her so sad. And after she watched Jurassic Park, she got so terrified of the dinosaurs that she wouldn't go near her own toy reptiles for weeks. She also made some famous friends. In 2001, she met Robin Williams. Coco had been in a deep behavior withdrawal for months, the kind that mirrored depression in every way that mattered, because her gorilla companion Michael had just died. She hadn't smiled once. But when Robin Williams walked into her room, something shifted. He started acting completely ridiculous, stealing her glasses, making goofy faces. And Coco laughed. She actually signed the word chuckle and gave him a massive, tight hug. Years later, in 2014, when the news broke that Robin Williams had passed away, Penny told Coco. The gorilla's lip began to tremble. She walked to the corner, isolated herself, and signed the word cry. Every time I think about this, it makes me want to cry. We lost two wonders when both of them passed away. As Coco entered her late 40s, her body began to fail. In the wild, gorillas rarely make it past 35. But with constant medical care for her arthritis and respiratory issues, Coco kept pushing. Her communication shifted from asking for juice and keys to something more intense. She became deeply aware of her own mortality. One day, a caregiver showed her a human skeleton and asked if it was alive or dead. Coco signed dead. Then, the caregiver asked where dead gorillas go. Coco didn't hesitate. She signed comfortable whole and then blew a gentle kiss into the air. Near the very end, the Gorilla Foundation put together a project where Coco could use a special symbol computer to send a message for a global climate conference. The foundation edited together signs from different sessions to build a sequence, something that the scientific community later debated heavily. But the words they assembled were chilling. She looked into the camera and signed, I am a gorilla. I am flowers, animals, I am nature. Man, Coco, love earth. Coco, love, but man, stupid. Coco, cry. Fix earth. Help earth. On June 19, 2018, just weeks before her 47th birthday, the ride finally ended. Coco passed away peacefully in her sleep at the Woodside facility. When the news hit, the scientific community spent weeks arguing about data. They debated whether her signs were actual grammar or just highly advanced conditioning. But honestly, I think those academics completely missed the point. In my opinion, the real legacy of Coco isn't her vocabulary list. It's the fact that she could look at a dead friend or a skull and understand what was death. We spend billions of dollars searching for intelligent life in the universe, staring at the stars, waiting for a signal. But we had an entirely different species right here on Earth, sitting in a trailer in California, looking us in the eyes and telling us exactly how she felt. She showed us that the emotional barrier we've built between humans and the rest of the world is just a lie we tell ourselves to feel superior. Do you think it's true that animals experience grief just like we do? Yes or no? Let us know your opinion in the comments.